buses, so they come in waves. You know, so the first bus ride group has arrived, and there might be
When does it actually start?
7:30. Yeah. So we got another
Just goes to show you how time I can be in school.
5 more minutes.
Well, one of my friends says that she, and I think this is admirable, even though
Turn our
she's,
cell phones off. Turn our cell phones off.
oh, mine is off.
Mine isn't.
But a friend of mine tells me she buys just to make sure. When you turn yours off, I just
Yeah. No, I want it to go all the way.
I just turn the thing off up there.
I'm sorry. Okay.
Oh, she to support the students, she pays for all of the class, all of the lectures, all the sessions. So she contributes to it.
How does that help the students?
It's she thinks that it's part of
GBCI?
no, not GBCI, the scholarship. If there's leftover money, it goes to the scholarship.
Oh, yeah. Well, I used to just do that. I used to just pay for the whole thing, because I didn't come, because I go up to New York, so I miss, and usually, of course, I didn't miss that many because I usually travel up on Tuesday, see the opera Wednesday, travel back Thursday, so I'm here Thursday night. But sometimes, of course, I get in and I'm yucked, and I don't want to come, But this year, my operas are all over the ballpark, so I'm going to be gone on a Monday at some point, and sometimes I'll be gone on a Thursday, and, so I went through and I looked at my calendar in my hand, and, nope, you can't go to that one, can't go to that one. So I could, as you say, just give them the money.
I find that going to Solomon's is a very draining experience. Just driving down there, and one day. So I don't know. It would be nice if we were all young.
Oh, yeah. You said you were older than me. I don't know. I'm 82.
I was born in 44.
43.
Yeah.
March 43.
So
We're just a year apart. And I'm older.
all right. I'll keep that in mind.
Yes. When I speak, I expect.
Yes. There is a town in New York that's called Averill.
Is it named after Averell Harriman?
No,
Wasn't he a governor of New York or something?
He was,
Yeah.
but no.
Oh, it's just a.
It's just a location. And I have never been there, but I was on an airplane once, and whoever the guy sitting next to me was, he said, I'm John, and I said, I'm Averill, and I don't know why, I said something about it, and he said, oh yes, there's a town near where I live called Averill. And that was the first time that I knew that.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a town called Alice in the middle of Australia.
Well,
It's not really. It's Alice Springs or something.
Yes.
I don't know if that's the name of the town or that Alice is the name of the spring. I'm not quite sure.
Yes. Well, it would be interesting to know more about it.
We're getting there. Okay.
According to my watch, it is 7:30.
Mine is 7:28. Okay, we're ready. Whenever you.
Oops, there we go.
Wow.
You're under the spotlight.
Yes.
Good evening and welcome. Say again, Mike. Good evening and welcome to Keese School. Tonight we're going to hear from Alice and April about the last 24 years and what has happened to all of us during those 24 years since the attack on the World Trade Center. And they will describe how the sounds, pace, and life has changed for all of us because of the attack and the results of it. They will also detail some organizational changes in the U.S. government and how it made major changes in everyone's life. So let's give a warm welcome to Alice and April.
Thank you. I'm Alice Wong, April Farrelly. We live on the 8th floor of the Diamond Building. Several years after we had both moved into AMV, we discovered that we had both been in New York City on 9/11. In 2021, we gave a talk about our experience that day. Because of unexpected events, the Keese School asked us to revisit our previous presentation, but to provide an update on what has happened at the World Trade Center area since 2001. We will make some references to the actual day, but most of our talk will be about the impact the event had on our lives and the changes to our country. For those of you who saw on AMV TV last night, our 2021 presentation, and if you notice any discrepancies between that one and this one, we attribute that to time. Okay. Also, you will note that we included you in our title slide. We talk about New York, but Washington, D.C. was also attacked that day. After our presentation tonight, we want to ask some questions about your memories of that day. The day nobody working at 6 World Trade Center died. Since the first plane hit the north face of the North Tower, debris was falling on 6 World Trade Center, the 8-story U.S. Customs House, which sat directly next to the North Tower. The building was evacuated, and because people in the building could see debris falling by the windows and could hear explosions, everybody left the building, which was not our normal response to fire alarms. I was a fire warden on my floor, and normally it was like pulling teeth to get people to leave. That day, everybody left and was outside when the second plane hit the South Tower. And so it became exceedingly clear that no one was going back to work that day. And people began to move and leave and try to make their way home. Therefore, that's another view. Therefore, nobody was near the tower when they fell. Nobody from 6 World Trade was near the towers when they fell. And they were not caught up in that dust storm that shot down the narrow streets of Lower Manhattan. And that was toxic, toxic dust. The aftermath was not as comforting. That winter, several employees, especially ones who had had underlying medical conditions, passed away. I assume from accumulated stress, PTSD, something of that nature. I was not at 6 World Trade Center that morning, but I had a clear view of the towers from the window in the building I was in, and I actually was on the phone trying to locate my daughter to tell her I wasn't at the World Trade Center. And I watched in disbelief as I saw one of the towers just pancake down like a special effects in a movie. It was unreal. Once, nobody sort of knew what was going on that day exactly. So the authorities in New York closed the bridges and the tunnels and shut down the subway system. And so people were walking away from Lower Manhattan, especially like people living in Queens went north, and with the idea of going across the Queensboro Bridge or something of that nature. Those of us who lived in Brooklyn, would have tried to congregate toward the Brooklyn Bridge, but they couldn't leave. They weren't being allowed, nobody was allowed to cross the bridges. They were just sort of piling up at the edges. So in the early afternoon, the government, the governor, I don't know who, but they opened the bridges to pedestrian traffic only. And I was sitting in this office that whole time just watching TV because nobody wanted to work that day. We just sort of watched TV. And, the scrolling and of course what we were watching was the World Trade Center area. And so at the bottom of the screen, there was a scroll saying that the bridges had been opened for pedestrian traffic. So I asked my my hosts if I could borrow a bottle of water, or have a bottle of water, and started walking home to Brooklyn. And I think it was most likely a 5-mile walk. It was an absolutely beautiful day. And there was no traffic anymore. This is the afternoon. People had made it already past Midtown, who were going north. They made it past Midtown. And the cars couldn't go anywhere anyway, so nobody was driving. And it was just gorgeous. It was an absolutely gorgeous day. And the only sound you heard was sirens of police cars and or ambulances. That was it. April, what memories do you have?
While sirens were very prominent that day on 9/11, in the first few weeks after the attack, what I remember is the silence. I'm not sure why the streets were so silent. Was it that there were fewer people in the city? Did they not come to work? Certainly, there was no one going to work in the World Trade Center area. Was it that drivers didn't honk? I lived near a street where everybody honked all the time before that. Perhaps it was that pedestrians stopped to look at the pictures of all the people that were missing. In any case, the streets were silent. The atmosphere was especially noticeable in the subway stations. I had not realized how much chit-chat there was between the passengers on the train and the passengers as they waited for the subway cars to come. But when I was in the subway station, the only sounds that I heard after the attack were the metal wheels of the subway trains going over the metal tracks. The other thing that was different was that there were no buskers in the station. The station that I used most regularly was under Grand Central Terminal. And there was always this person, and I'm not sure this is true, but I'd always assumed it was the same person who dressed up as the Statue of Liberty. The face of the person was covered in silver paint. The hand holding the torch was covered in silver paint. And there was this silver drapery hanging, the person was wearing. But the Statue of Liberty was not under Grand Central Station. On the platforms, the lack of conversation was just sort of eerie. My husband and I did go down to the World Trade Center area and walk around to see what was going on. And also, I visited with friends who worked in offices that weren't damaged, but were in the financial district. And when you were down there, it seemed sort of eerie. If they were close friends, we all talked about what happened on 9/11. One person described to me how his office, which was high up in the building he worked in, how one of the planes flew down his street right by the office and then went into one of the towers. The other thing that was eerie was over time, there were cars parked in parking garages that were built up. You could see them. There were just levels of parking garages. And there were cars in there that were covered with dust, but didn't move. And one could make all sorts of assumptions about why those cars were there. One of the other things that I remember vividly is the odor that permeated the area around the World Financial Center. Everything was covered in dust. And the remains of the building and the people, there was an odor that is not something that you forget. Six months after the World Trade Center was attacked, this memorial was put up, and it lasted for 6 months. It somehow seemed so appropriate to the occasion. I remember flying from Washington, D.C. up to LaGuardia Airport, and the airplane flew right by the lights. It was a very emotional experience. These lights are shown each year now on the anniversary of 9/11. So tonight, I think if you were in New York, you would see them. Alice, did you ever go back to the World Trade Center?
Thank you.
I was out of work for 2 months while the GSA, Government Service Agency, well, I don't think that's the right name, GSA, tried to locate office space for us in Manhattan. Their job was complicated by the fact that customs management would not approve being on higher floors. I did not go back into Manhattan during that time. I did not notice much change in my Brooklyn neighborhood, except for the long lines of people trying to donate blood. The new office was in Midtown, in a Midtown high-rise. On the first day that we showed up for work, management informed us that they would try to find work at JFK or the Newark offices if working in Manhattan was just not something an employee could do. As it happened, my wonderful assistant was so shaken by 9/11, she took a transfer to Newark because she lived in New Jersey. It meant a career change for her because she'd be working in a different division. Part of why she was so struck is she wore braces on her legs, And so therefore, maneuvering steps was very difficult, and she certainly, as she pointed out to me, could not run. So if she hadn't been outside of the building when the second plane hit and had a chance to start walking then, she had an hour to get away from the building before they happened to collapse. And if that had not been the case, she most likely would have died that day. When we returned to the office, there were some obvious differences in the behavior of people who had been at the World Trade Center on 9/11 and those like me who had not. The sound of sirens would make people jump. And since we were located at 34th Street between 7th and 8th Avenue, that sound was rather frequent. Our management, to their credit, stated that if there were fire trucks, if you looked out, heard a siren, you looked out the window and you saw fire trucks anywhere near our building, anyone who felt uncomfortable could leave the building even though no alarms were going off on our floor. You have to understand that the evacuation rules for high-rise buildings are different than for small buildings. The alarm goes off on the floor that the alarm is triggered, the floor below that, and the floor above that. And those people, those 3 floors, are expected to evacuate. But nobody else is. And these are the same rules, by the way, that apply to Diamond. Diamond is technically a high-rise. You shelter in place. Since our new building was at least 25 stories, though there could have been a fire above us. We were on the 9th floor, and we would not have seen smoke, and we would not have heard alarms. Another interesting development was the presence of little purses. For the ladies, it had been our habit at 6 World Trade Center to arrive at work, lock our rather large purses in the desk, and go about our day. If there was a fire drill and you weren't in your office at the time, you just left the building. We generally had fire drills on nice days, so you didn't even have to go back to your desk to get your coat. Those employees who had been away from their office on 9/11, and there was a whole bunch of them because we were having a conference, and they were actually out-of-towner customs officers from different ports of entry who had come in for a seminar. They left the building without their purses and had to make it home without money, house keys, or cell phone. Though not many of us had cell phones in those days, and later in the day the cell phones weren't working anyway. Upon returning to the office, those employees, those specific employees, had these small purses, which they never went anywhere without. Also, a lot more people had cell phones. And when we had a fire drill, everyone promptly left the building and walked the 3 long blocks to our staging area. When I retired in 2007, it was expected that our office at 34th Street would be moved to the Freedom Tower that was being built in the World Trade Center area when the construction was completed, and it wasn't completed until 2014. I looked it up on the internet, and so it does appear that the United States, the Customs and Border Protection Agency is in the now known as One World Trade. It's not called the Freedom Tower anymore, it's called One World Trade Center. And they're located on the 50th floor. I don't know how they got anyone to go there, but anyway. It is interesting to me that One World Trade Center is actually built on the exact same footprint of 6 World Trade Center. April, did you have a similar experience?
Alice, I'm so impressed that you remember all these details. As I was thinking about what happened nearly 25 years ago, it's hard to believe. I realize that while a few memories are crystal clear, so much of what I think about is very fuzzy. Yes, I was out of work for a while, but how long was I out of work? I have no idea. Eventually, my office was located in a building. I don't know where it is now. I guess that shows how much I'm a creature of Washington, D.C. But I was able to walk to work, or if it were raining or snowy, I could take the bus. So it was a much nicer building than when I worked at the World Trade Center. And each day, though whether I took the bus or walked, I passed by a bakery near where I lived. In the bakery, there was a sign which said, "Life is uncertain. Eat dessert first." Now you know why this title, well, the title of this talk is that. This sign seems so appropriate to me, for the whole experience of living in Manhattan was a very different experience from Washington, D.C., and life is uncertain. So we have this light, this memorial. It's called the Tribute of Light. And I like it. I like this very much. But I want to remember, too, what happened around the area of the World Trade Center. Near, sort of across the street from the two towers, was the Millennium Hilton Hotel. If you go on the Hilton website today, you'll find it's called the Downtown Hilton. And it's much less, it's less expensive to stay there than it is to stay at a Hilton in Midtown. So at one point, Ed and I went and stayed there in the new rebuilt Millennium Hilton Hotel. You can see it's all shiny. I think one of the characteristics of the buildings that were approved by the Planning Commission for the new World Trade Center is that they're glass and they gleam. From our room, which was on the front part of this hotel, you could see down into the construction area of what they were building. The deconstruction of the World Trade Center took 6 months. After that, it was called a construction site. Now, I think the building that's standing here is the AT&T building, but you can see how much of the area they had to dig out. The first building that went up after as they were building new buildings was the new Building 7. The old building that I remember, I thought was brown. I understand the facade was actually red granite, but the new one is not red granite. It is gleaming. This was the first building and you can see that it's next to the AT&T building. It was open in 2006. You can see here the new One World Trade Center. The other buildings that you see are buildings that survived, the World Financial Center?
Yep.
Yes, the one with the round one and the pointed one are the World Financial Center. We have another view of that. This sort of makes you think, puts it in a different perspective. You can see how tall it was. If you go out in the hallway and look at our gallery, a local artist has Mary Kirby has painted a picture of One World Trade Center, and she painted it in 2021. So it's in our gallery and it's well worth looking at. Another thing that was built, another structure that was built in the World Trade Center area is the Oculus. This building represents a dove that is released from a child's hand. And we all know the symbol of a dove. It was completed in 2016, and underneath it brings together 12 subway lines and the PATH train from New Jersey. So it's the center, the transportation hub of the World Trade Center. Next to the Oculus, in the underground area, is a shopping mall. Now, this is a very high-end shopping mall. It gleams. It reminded me when I was there of shopping in an Asian airport, aluminum, shining aluminum, glass. It was lovely. It was so different from the shopping area that was under the original World Trade Center plaza. Down there was all this terrazzo and concrete. It was very utilitarian. You could go into a drugstore. There was a bookstore. There weren't the high-end shops that are here underneath next to the Oculus. There is also this memorial garden. The pools are in the footprint of the two towers. And the surrounding, in the pools are the largest man-made waterfalls in the United States. The waterfall drops some 30 feet. I think the grove of trees is intended to lend an air of comfort and solemnity to the site. There's also an underground museum that was opened in 2014. As you can see here, there's the piece of the wall that was left from one of the towers, and this is a painted structural member of one that remains from one of the towers. There are about 6 million people who apparently visit this area each year, and 3 million that go down to the museum. After the 9/11 events, the United States government set up a commission. Of course they set up a commission. We set up a commission for everything. The 9/11 Commission was to study what went wrong and make recommendations for changes in the government that would prevent the events from happening. One of the major changes was the establishment of a new cabinet office that impacted Alice. Thank you.
It was called the Department of Homeland Security. Prior to 9/11, there were 3 different government agencies that had responsibility at the border. The Immigration Service, which was part of the Justice Department, the Customs Service, which was part of the Treasury Department, and the Agriculture Inspection Service, which was part of the Department of Agriculture. Since a failure of intelligence and poor communication seemed between the different agencies was thought to have played a role in the attackers' success, it was decided that all of these agencies would now be put into one department, and so Customs and Border Protection and the more famous Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, were formed in the brand new Department of Homeland Security. I'm going to be showing my prejudice from now on. In the old system, I had worked in the Import Specialist Division, whose function was tariffs and trade. Since we were part of the Department of the Treasury, collecting money and ensuring accurate trade statistics was important. In the new environment, the focus was on protection and security. And so in the battles of the budget in the different divisions and departments in Homeland Security, our division began to lose importance. We noticed consolidation of offices, less money for training, things of that nature. For example, recently in the news, you heard the president close the loophole on the de minimis exception. That exception served a purpose. It costs money to collect money. You need to staff to process the packages and the passengers. You need cashiers to collect and process the money. In my day, and now we're talking 20, 30 years ago, what that meant was you did not collect duty on a package or from a passenger unless that duty amount was going to be over $10, because it cost the government $10 to collect any amount of money. Over time, the duty rates have come down. In some cases, 0 is a duty rate. And most likely, the cost of collecting money has gone up. So it is not unreasonable that a package valued at $800 would not be processed for duty because it would cost more money to collect it than it would cost to just ship it out the door. Because of the internet and cell phones and companies like Amazon, the volume of small value importations has increased tremendously in this past decade. I cannot imagine the number of people who will have to be hired to handle all of these packages that we are now going to be collecting duty on. Since most of the divisions in Customs and Border Protection were armed, we all have badges, even the import specialists. In the face of the decline of our division, we import specialists used to joke that we had to figure out a way to do our work that would require we carry a firearm. And then maybe they'd give us more money. I mean, our agency would give us more money. April, what do you talk about?
9/11 was deemed a colossal intelligence failure. You remember the reports of the students at airplane schools that wanted to learn to fly a plane but not land a plane? These reports were in the FBI. Other parts of the intelligence community never heard of those reports. So we reorganized, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence was set up. This office was supposed to integrate and encourage sharing among the intelligence community. I don't know. I'm not there. I don't know if they share these days. You also may remember the War on Terror. That came immediately after 9/11. The intelligence community was especially interested in looking for Osama bin Laden. One place they thought he might be was Afghanistan, and military forces went into Afghanistan looking for Osama bin Laden. A multinational force was stood up and spent 20 years in Afghanistan. There was also Operation Iraqi Freedom. The Bush administration thought that Iraq could have been protecting Al-Qaeda, and so they looked for Al-Qaeda in Iraq. They were also afraid, you remember this? Weapons of mass destruction. This led to an insurgency in Iraq, and the United States spent many years in Iraq and withdrew its forces in 2011. Where was Osama bin Laden eventually found? Where? You have to speak louder. In Pakistan? Yes, not in Iraq, not in Afghanistan. But think about the other changes that happened to us because of our fear of terrorism. Until just recently, you had to take your shoes off when you went through security. Security at airports was really much more intense after 9/11. I believe that even the office buildings that I visit, where my doctors are in Bethesda, have tighter security because of 9/11. You know, there's a banking regulation that says, know your customer, and you can't easily deposit more than $10,000 at one time. Well, I must admit I don't deposit $10,000 all that often, but there's concern about financing of terrorism. It also seems to me that one of the things that happened after 9/11 was the rise of conspiracy theories. Conspiracies consume so much of our time. It's also, I think, interesting that conspiracy theories were accompanied by the rise of new technology. It's so much easier to share a discussion about what's going on through social media and through texting and telephones than it had been before 9/11. Technology has really changed our lives. 9/11 did change things, but I think we ought to acknowledge that in the past, there were other events that I'm sure many of us remember that led to changes that were probably as dramatic in our lives. Think about 1963. Where were you when JFK was shot? Do you remember exactly where you were? I do. There were other important events. In 1968, Robert Kennedy was shot, and Martin Luther King was shot. In Washington, D.C., after Martin Luther King was shot, there were riots in the streets. I remember that clearly because I was driving around D.C. that night. I know that there are people who live at AMV who remember Pearl Harbor. I don't. But think about what happened after that and how dramatic the change was. One other event that I'll call to mind, I doubt that there's anybody who remembers this, but it certainly had an impact on all of us for many years. That was the stock market crash in 1929. These events are not unusual. They happen to all of us and they change us. I'm not quite sure what comes next, but there will be change, I'm sure, ahead of us. Alice?
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Could we have the house lights up? Thank you. It's your turn now. Okay, we're going to ask you a bunch of questions, and I'd like a show of hands. How many of you remember where you were or what you were doing when you first heard about either New York City on 9/11 or the Pentagon on 9/11? Aha. Surprise! Yes, okay. Next one, hands down. How many of you were in the DC area on 9/11? Oh, wow. Okay. How many of you were at the Pentagon on 9/11? Oh, okay. How many of...
Could I see the people at the Pentagon?
People at the
Were there
Pentagon on
2 hands?
9/11?
I thought I saw 2 people raise their hands for
Okay.
at the Pentagon. Okay.
Okay. And then my last question is, 2 more. Were any of you at a building that was thought to be the target of the 4th plane? That would have been the Capitol building, the White House, any of those? Okay. We're just curious about that. Okay, this one should have a big answer. How many of you were working with someone who had family at the Pentagon? Yeah. Okay. Our wonderful ushers are going to bring the microphones if you have a question for either Avril or I, or if you wish to share your experience. So raise your hand and make sure you hold right up against your mouth.
Thank you for your wonderful presentation. The first one and this one as well.
I don't think it's on.
The question is about this colorful.
I'll start over.
No, I heard it, so the
Okay.
question is...
My question is about this colorful column
Yeah.
that maybe you could make this picture more distinct for us again. What is the nature of this very colorful column that's in the middle of this picture? I wondered if you could tell us about it, please.
I think it was a support pillar.
Yes, that's about all I know, and it was, people painted it. You'll have to go to the museum in New York. Or maybe I have not been in the museum. And
We could do another one.
Yes. That's a good question. I can't answer it. When you look online at what's in the museum, it shows things like a destroyed fire truck that the buildings collapsed on. And there are thousands of artifacts that have been found as they were digging out. But I don't know more than that.
Any other?
When did life return to some semblance of normalcy where you were after 9/11?
As far as my office was concerned, people got who were able to come back and work in Manhattan. The ones who really didn't even start. They were immediately transferred to Newark or to JFK and got jobs, you know, they had lateral transfers. We eventually got less jumpy when we heard sirens and things like that. And again, I retired in 2007, January of 2007, so I was only really working for another 5 years in the Customs Service. And I think, I mean, you had to, in those 5 years, things didn't change that much. I mean, you still had to, you know, you always had to go through security to even get in a building before you get to the elevators. And you had to have a pass, and you know, had to have ID, and you know, that kind of stuff. So I don't think there was that much change, you know, a backing off of anxiety. I think it stayed that way, at least the remaining 5 years that I worked in customs.
Alice and I have actually talked about this a little bit. I've wondered if people's reaction depended in part on the age of the person. Younger people seemed more resilient, I believe, than some of the older people. Though, you know, I heard today an interview with somebody, I don't know who it was, but this individual said he worked in the White House, and on 9/12, the day after 9/11, the White House was evacuated a second time because there was a fear of terrorism. So I think in a not strange way, but maybe in a strange way, it sort of permeated, the whole incident permeated everything. I remember I needed to fill out a form or something at a bank, and I went to a bank in New York, a year after 9/11? And they asked me for a piece of paper, and I said, oh, I don't have that piece of paper. It was in my desk at the World Trade Center. I can't show it to you. And they said, oh my goodness, don't worry about it. We don't need that piece of paper. So people were very accommodating, I think, to us, and everybody in the city was aware and cognizant of it for months, if not years, and probably today, even today.
Many, many years ago, I lived in Manhattan, and I visited after 9/11 in New York. My impression was that the New Yorkers were much friendlier than they had been prior to that time. It had been a little less personal, but when I revisited, the police were very sweet and smiling, and it just seemed that there was a different feel in the city, totally. And it was a positive feeling of being together somehow, and I wondered if you had noticed anything like that.
Certainly in the first year, there was an accommodation of people. New Yorkers were known for, you walk fast and you brush right by people and you don't talk and you certainly don't smile. And, and it changed. That did change. People were more polite, a little less brusque. I remember I had a similar incident. It had been my habit, do my bills, take them into the office, because there was a post office right by the office. And so they'd be sitting on my desk, and then when I went out for lunch or something, I'd take them and mail them and whatever. And of course, they disappeared that day. And I guess 2 or 3 days after, I'm home and I realize, oh my God, the bills are, I have to call them up and tell them I can't, it'll be late, because I would have mailed it, you would have had it by now. And so I called, from the number on one of my credit cards and said, I have to inform you, I'm going to write a check today. You'll get the, it was in the World Trade. Oh! As soon as I said the word World Trade, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. Just whenever you get around to it, just send a check. Like credit card companies usually don't do that. But, that's the way they were. It's certainly initially. I mean, that first. And like people giving blood, they were turning us away. Unfortunately, they didn't need a lot of blood. There weren't many survivors. So they didn't need a lot of blood, and the Red Cross was turning people away. My daughter, when she was walking home, she was higher up in Manhattan, and when she started walking home, she stopped at Bellevue to give blood, and they turned her away. They said, we don't need any, because, there weren't that many people surviving, and but everybody, you wanted to do something, and so giving blood was something everybody thought about. So the lines around the corner to give blood.
I just went to the Ultimate Authority on AI and looked up the column. The tall painted column in the 9/11 memorial is known as the last column. It's a 36-foot piece of steel from the World Trade Center's South Tower. It was the final piece of steel removed from ground zero, becoming a powerful symbol of loss, remembrance, and resilience of the community. And it's still covered by thousands of inscriptions and mementos left by recovery workers and victims' families.
Ah, okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you could put the lid down on that computer.
No, we were told not to touch it. Well, well, I guess we could now. We could.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
Because I can hear you better when I can see your lips move.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Carol.
We were living in the New York area, in the immediate suburbs, but Harry and I both worked in hospitals. I was in the Bronx and he was in Manhattan. I think at all the hospitals, sort of apropos of the blood that you mentioned, everywhere we were all prepared, and sadly, hardly anybody came except to right near the World Trade Center. But just to talk about health effects afterwards. At the time, people from all over the city and the suburbs would rush down in the evenings to help, after work, and they got into all the dust and everything else, and the fire and other workers, people who worked on the pile. Unfortunately, there have been really terrible health repercussions for all the endless Good Samaritans. So I'd like to remember them. Thank you.
Yeah, what she was saying is that, people wanted to do help, anything. And so they actually, came to the reconstruction site. Well, at that point, it was just clean up the mess. But it was as that all that dust was there, and anybody who breathed it in was endangering themselves, and that's why we've had so many of the firemen die, because it was just and the construction workers and the police who were there kept breathing in this horrible dust stuff, and there's been a high mortality after the fact.
In fact, today in the newspaper, it said that as many people have died from the impact of what they breathed in as were killed that day. So this is 24 years later, and there will probably be people who will continue to die from what they breathed in.
Well, I have a comment, but it's not about 9/11, it's about the Pentagon.
Oh, please, we would,
I just
you know,
have-
Alice and I were in New York, but that was not all of 9/11, and we would really like to know what happened in Washington, D.C.
Well, I happen to be going through some items in our house of interest, and one of them was the memorials for Captain Burlingame, who was the captain in the flight that went into the Pentagon, and also to, there's a flight attendant, and her name I can't recall, but my husband was a pilot for American, and he happened to know both of these people. And they had flown with both of these people. So it was very kind of emotional in our family because it was closer to home. But it was just interesting because I just ran across this just the other day. Yeah. And there were beautiful memorials for both of these people in the Washington area.
I was working at the Department of Energy in Forrestal building, and I was accompanying the assistant secretary to go to Newark. And so we were in, he drove us up to, his driver drove us up to National, and we wondered where everybody was. And they were all looking at television screens.
Yes.
And we saw what was happening. His staff person got on the phone and called his driver to turn around and come back and pick us up because obviously we weren't going anyplace. But his driver already had not heard that, was on his way back. Well, I worked on the 7th floor of Forrestal. I could see the Pentagon, and the thing that was confusing was the Department of Energy has 10 national laboratories that are spread out across the country. We had no idea whether there was going to be a tax on our national laboratories because some of them had reactors, some of them had nuclear weapons, and so we didn't know exactly what to do. So I called all the ones that I was responsible for and said, shut everything down and lock the gates and increase the security. And I looked out the window of the 7th floor, and this F-15 flew right by.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know if that was the one that was on its way to Shanksville or not. I never knew that.
Yeah.
But what was amazing was the lack of understanding of what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
No one knew.
Yeah.
So we all just had to assume the worst case scenario.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons they shut down all the bridges and the tunnels, the assumption was they would be attacked also, and wouldn't have to be a plane, could be a car. That's why they shut them down. A car could drive into the tunnel, blow itself up, and that would be the end of the Holland Tunnel, that kind of thing. So, because nobody knew. And at that point, in the beginning, there was still the 4th plane in the air, which they had figured out there was a 4th plane. Nobody knew. So that's why things got shut down. They shut down the airports. People who were not at home ended up having much longer vacations because they couldn't get a flight home. So yeah, it had a major immediate impact on the entire country.
One more quick question.
Okay, one more question.
On 9/11, I was a government contractor with TRW. And I was on the 19th floor of the old Xerox building in Roslyn, a clear and close view of the Pentagon. I was at my desk when someone screamed, they bombed the Pentagon, because I felt a blast at that time. And everyone ran to the window to see the fire erupting from windows, blowing them out. And needless to say, no further work got done that day. TRW set up a large TV screen so we could watch the news. And as I looked down at the streets in Roslyn, they were empty until the USA Today building evacuated. They thought they were a target. So thousands of people were walking up and down the streets. They disappeared. By 4:30, a wave of military and civilians from the Pentagon were sent to the Roslyn metro station. So they walked through Arlington National Cemetery and they clogged the streets. But when I left that day to go home, everything was deserted. I could walk across the busiest intersections, cat-a-corner.
Let's give Alice and April a round of applause.